In three, two, one, get your frog burgers ready because we're here with another FrameCast. How's it going, Drew?
I actually watched that this morning, and I was really entertained. You did a good job with that. You
I
should do
appreciate
more.
it. Thank you.
Do more.
I always appreciate starting off FrameCast with a compliment to me.
Yeah.
I also want to say I was really entertained by your latest Arbiters. They were very enjoyable. Uh, you managed to hold yourself up very well in the face of chaos.
Was that the one that I had a mental breakdown on?
Yes. Did
Okay,
you?
cool.
Anyway.
Well,
Anyway,
I recorded another one since then.
I'm really curious what that will be about. If you guys want to see it, you can download that with a free season pass on Casino Galleon on YouTube. Uh, but anyway, today we're not here to talk about videos. We're not here to suck each other off and give each other compliments on each other's content. We can do that another time. But we're talking about DLCs, expansion content in 2020. Because, Drew, you came up to me and said, there's something going on with the Pokemon game. We talked about a Pokemon game a couple weeks ago, but something's happened. They're bringing out new DLC, and we need to talk about this. What's going on?
Right. Okay. So we've already started the year fairly hot with PC getting the updated expansion of Iceborne for Monster Hunter World, which basically forces you to what's called download the whole game again. Congratulations for anyone that has like a slow as shit internet connection like I do. But the big one that hit the news was Pokemon Sword and Shield having downloadable content for the Nintendo Switch. Now, a lot of people are up in arms about this, which is interesting. There are a lot of viewpoints. There are some points which are, well, why aren't these Pokemon, these older Pokemon, already available in the game? Why do we have to download them via a DLC, right? So to elaborate slightly, over the course of this expansion pass, which is 2 DLCs, they are releasing an additional 200 older gen Pokemon. Right? So they're re-putting them back into the game. And a lot of people are taking umbrage to the fact that this is happening. Webcam. So, webcam, come on.
So the idea is that the Pokemon game, which released a couple months ago, we talked about in the Framecast, they're adding new territory in it as form of a paid DLC. And with that paid DLC comes the opportunity of exploring these new territories where you can capture 200 old Pokemon which weren't in the game initially, which caused a big controversy because it was the first time that you couldn't catch old Pokemon. So people kind of feel like they're being they've been given back their Pokemon, but now they have to pay for it, right?
Yeah, so people are feeling swindled that, you know, that this isn't just available as like a free part of the update. But regardless of that, the other side of things is that the expansion is only unlockable per, I want to say platform, I mean per set, per region, per God, how do I per version. There you go.
Yeah.
That sounds gross. Yeah. So you either buy the expansion, you buy the sword expansion for sword, or you buy the shield expansion for shield. There is no universal expansion, which also people have kicked off about. So if you have both games, sorry, hiccups. If you have both games, then instead of buying the expansion once for both of them, you have to buy them once each.
Yeah.
Right. So people have issue with that as well.
So do you want to go more in depth about the Pokemon topic, or that you want to bring this up as an example for something that's happening now with DLC and expansion packs?
So I think one thing that I want to lead towards this is what is the impact that it has on Pokemon? How are communities reacting to this so negatively, so to speak? And what it means for the cost and things like that, and what it means for other games,
Mm-hmm.
right? So to talk about the impact on Pokemon, right? So I've spoken to a few people about this, and the number of people that have turned around and said, like, this isn't how it happened before. This is completely different from what Nintendo would do before. And in the past, Nintendo or Game Freak would sell rehashed copies of the same game. So
Mm-hmm.
we're talking, we had Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and then we had Pokemon Emerald, which was effectively the same game, but with extra plot after the actual completion of the badges and the gym challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had Pokemon Black and White, and we just had Black and White 2, right? We had it was like,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's Pokemon Sun and Moon. I think we had Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I
Mm-hmm.
think, but this time it's completely different. We don't have just rebundled versions of the game. We actually have DLC content now. I think this is a positive thing
Mm-hmm.
for the Pokemon franchise. The reason why it's happening now is because the older generations of handheld console did not have expandable memory,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So you couldn't put a memory card in, you couldn't put in what's the name of the damn thing? A micro SD card. None of that happened, right? All the game save files were on the game cartridges themselves. Now with the Nintendo Switch, it's stored on the device, right? So I remember when you messaged me and asked me if I started a new profile on the Switch, would I be able to play Pokemon Scratch and not affect my save file? And the good news was, yes, you could,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it was saved on the device. I personally think that taking Pokemon into the DLC territory is a step forward, right? Typically, I don't feel that with a lot of games, right? But with Pokemon, I think it's a good idea, and it has potential. It has potential to go wrong. Don't get me wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that I would prefer to buy DLC. That's half the price of the full game, than buy the full game again.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is it is better that there is DLC than if there was no DLC and this new upgraded or added content would have been sold in a way that was just a brand new game that you had to buy for $60, right?
Yes, no, I'm totally saying that.
Yeah.
Like full retail price for a minuscule amount of content
Mm-hmm.
at the end just doesn't feel worth it. Plus, nothing stops Game Freak from just doing, like we've got 2 new regions. Well, what happens if they turn around and eventually they've released 8 new regions?
So I think that I agree. It is better that there is a capability to add more content to a pre-existing game than to build an entirely new game, or actually like sell an entirely new game, which is 95% the same game but 5% new extra content. I think as a value proposition, that is a better choice. However, I feel this is a discussion which people have had a long time ago when we went from games on cartridges and discs and like local stored games in towards the online world, where all of a sudden we could add in DLC. All of a sudden you could add in content on the go. Developers could continuously add more content towards their games, allowing for games like Warframe and Destiny 2, and also games like Call of Duty to add in extra maps as bonus maps. However, I think that the thing that people are wary about, and I think that might be also a point which you might be wary about, is that it is better if a game were to have a little bit of additional content that is released as a DLC or an expansion rather than a brand new game that you have to separately buy again. However, it is problematic if the the percentage is thrown around where they sell you, like Anthem kind of did, sell you 5% of the game, and then release the next 95% as expansion packs, which you can buy over the years so that they can milk out more money out of one single title.
I completely agree on that. I mean, I know a lot of people have said to me that, not DLC, Destiny 2 is like really good value for money. It's amazing. It's absolutely brilliant. Like, I can appreciate that a lot of people feel this way, but my personal grievance to Destiny 2 is the simple fact that I paid full retail price plus the season pass, so it was £65 on Battle.net before the game came out, right? And it only had 6 hours of playable plot on launch, right? That was something that I took grievance with. I genuinely felt offended and ripped off, right? Like that might be a bit overkill to say, but still, it felt really bad, right? When I can buy, for example, let's make a direct comparison in terms of game length. I can buy Pokemon for £50 and play 30 to 40 hours on it to complete the base game, right?
So I think that the important difference for you between something like Destiny 2 and a Pokemon game is that for the same price, practically speaking, for the same price, the one game offers you at launch 6 hours of playtime, and the other game offers you 12, even more, way more playtime than the other one. So if you're looking at the amounts of playtimes at launch, you're definitely looking at a worse deal with Destiny than you were looking with Pokemon.
Yes, I typically heavily value whether or not a game is worth the money based on the amount of time it takes to complete the plot.
So
right?
I think that one of the important things which we're going to have to look at right now is what is the difference? Because we know that there is a difference between a game like Destiny 2 and a game like Pokemon, or a game like Warframe and a game like Call of Duty. What is the exact difference as far as it is relevant to the topic between these games? Because on the one hand, you have Destiny where on launch it has only 6 hours of playtime, which you would say if that was an exact same game like Pokemon, why does this even exist? This makes no sense. Look at Anthem. However, what you see with Destiny is that over the years, whether you like it or not, the thing has grown out to a much more bigger encompassing game. And yeah, you would have had to pay for all the expansions that were added on. However, right now, it's way different than the game it was back then, whereas the Pokemon game you could have bought back then when Destiny launched would have stayed pretty much the exact same game. So there is a difference between the two. And maybe, if I have to theorize, I think that the difference, it's a tough cookie, because if we boil it down, okay, go ahead.
To jump on what you're saying, so first off, you're not proposing that Pokemon crap, what are they called? What are the
Sword and Shield?
You're not proposing that Pokemon Sword and Shield, if it were to be released back when Destiny 2 was released, it would have the same content. You are referring to the fact that Pokemon back then, which were probably Sun and Moon, doesn't have much in terms of growth, which I completely agree with you, because of the way it was built. It was not built with DLC in mind. And I think the key fundamental thing to do with DLC is whether or not the game is built with this kind of progressive expansion or continual integration that what's called Destiny 2 has been built with. I remember the game Evolve. Do you remember this game?
Yeah, I remember it.
It was a 4v1, 4 people versus a giant monster. The very first thing that was announced about the game was that it would be having DLC content, right? Not the type of game, not the genre of game. Nothing else was announced about the game apart from the fact that it would have DLC content, right? What kind of a launch message is that? right?
When did they announce this?
In relative to what? To
Well, just
its
like
final release?
a general like time frame in which they announced that the big thing would be that it had DLC.
See if I can actually find it, because,
Well, like, do you have
well,
a rough idea?
oh god, it was years ago, man.
Because most likely what might have happened is that it was around a time where DLC was becoming a more popular option because like the internet and online play was a more accessible thing, especially with the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox 360. It was for the very first time that consoles actually had hard drives and you could actually do this download thing and it made sense and people were getting used to it. So it would make sense for them to come out and say it has DLC, as the idea of maybe they were trying to figure out how to say that this might become some sort of live service, even though by that time the live service idea wasn't fully realized or fully formed as a concept in people's minds, but they were like, imagine this game is no longer just a static game which you buy and will stay the same forever. You're buying this game and it will evolve.
Yeah, no, cue credits.
Cue credits. With time, which was, I feel, especially like 10 years ago, a really big selling point. Because I remember when I would have like the new Call of Duties come out and they would then have DLC. Like that DLC felt special because for the first time, like, why would a game just be what it is and why would it not be made better over time? That made no sense at a certain point for me because it was like, well, they can do this, why don't they do this? However, I think that the key point which we're looking at right now is the integrity of a game compared to its DLCs, or like based off on its DLCs. So if I have to break that down, I think that we're fine with having a game like Pokemon say, hey, I'm a game like Pokemon, which I am a solid game. You buy this game, this entire game is what it is, but we might add on one or two extra things, like Call of Duty did as well. And you can buy these as expansion packs because they're small little downloads, and it would make no sense if we had to like re-release the game. And you can buy them if you want to. You cannot buy them if you want to. Like, you still have a full game. As opposed to that, you have games which are like Warframe or Destiny 2, or as a infamous example actually, Anthem, which are, we start out from here and we're going to build on the game, and the game becomes what it is through the actual DLC. The expansions that are being added to my game are what make the game. It's not like we have a set game where we add a couple of things on there. I think that those two things are very important in the way that we view it. Because if you can have a very thoroughly enjoyable experience and feel that you play the entire game without the DLC, then you won't be bothered as much by the fact that there is DLC, like a couple of extra maps to like play zombies on. It's like, whatever, I played the game, I played what I bought for. However, if you were to buy solely like the first 6 hours of Destiny, and then that would be it, and you'd have to buy in to experience the thousands of extra hours which people are spending in it right now, you would feel like cheaped out.
I very much agree. I mean, from my research, very brief, I can't find when exactly the Evolve announcement was made about the DLC being the first thing, the controversy. I can find evidence that the controversy did exist, and I know that it was before 2014, right? Or at least before mid 2014. But beyond that, I don't know exactly when the announcement was made. I would not be surprised if it was made in 2013 or maybe even late 2012. However, that's besides the point. I do feel that games that have DLC content, like Destiny, have the opportunity to grow beyond the limitations of the initial release, right? I believe you said that mere moments ago. And I think that it can be healthy for games to go like, oh, we made a horrible mistake with this. Let's dramatically change it. But at the same time, I think that it's important that if the game is a game as a service, like World of Warcraft, like League of Legends, like Warframe, we have to respect the fact that sometimes the game developers need to change things radically to make the game relevant again, right? But likewise, if the game is a off-the-shelf product like Borderlands 3, right? And the developers try to treat it as a game as a service and then do something wild and wacky, like make all the good guns completely irrelevant, right? Then the game is going to tank, right? And I believe the game has tanked before the launch of the first DLC because of this very fact.
So, would it be right in saying that it is more of a expectations with what you buy sort of thing?
Can you elaborate on your question?
So, when last week, not last week, last week we didn't have for FrameCast. Last time we talked about Pokemon, we kind of concluded that it would be maybe favorable to Pokemon to create a live service game. So that they wouldn't have to like rebuild every single game again, and like everyone could just buy in, and then there would be expansions in the form of new regions, but you would be able to keep your Pokemon, and it would be one giant big Pokemon world.
Yeah.
And this step into adding DLC to a Pokemon game, which has pretty much never been done before, could be a signifier to something like that, in the sense of how people are afraid right now, where it's like, oh, they might be adding whole heaps of content and we might have to like buy all of that. This is not the entire game we're having. So in that sense, people are afraid that the game that they expected they would buy would be the entirety of the game on that single cartridge turns out to maybe, I very much do not expect it at all, maybe turn into a game where there is a lot more content which you have to pay for to download extra, which, because you expect it to be an off-the-shelf on a cartridge game, is problematic. Whereas if you were to buy into, well, I mean, I have some examples which aren't the greatest examples, like Anthem and Destiny 2, which Destiny 2 went free to play and Anthem is Anthem. But if you went into Destiny 2 and you thoroughly enjoyed that from launch, you bought into it knowing that it would get expansions because that's the idea of the game, and you would not be opposed to, oh my god, they're adding an expansion, because that's not what you expect.
So I believe you're asking me, would it have made more sense for Game Freak to announce before Pokemon Sword and Shield's initial release that is coming with DLC later on down the line?
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
I honestly don't know. I think part of the problem back then was the fact that Dexit was such a big thing. You know, I'm pretty sure people like Jim Sterling. Crap, what did he say at the end of his videos? Thank God for me, that was it.
Yeah.
What you got? Jim Sterling, thank God for him. That, you know, he was one of the advocates for Dexit, which I was not. I could appreciate the fact that there was a ludicrous number of Pokemon in the entire thing, right? But regardless, I think if they had made an announcement that, oh yeah, what you got, during the whole Dexit thing, we're going to be doing DLC, and you can buy back into an additional 200 Pokemon, that would have gone down so much worse, right?
Well,
I totally get where you're coming from. I totally feel that, you know, you can absolve things like Destiny 2 from a lot of its underwhelming, what you call it, story length nature, because it was announced that it would have DLC to follow it to expand the plot. Completely get behind that, and I do agree with you.
I don't necessarily think it's the announcement, because it's the expectation of what the game is. And this is what I'm trying to figure out. What's the difference? What's the essential difference between Destiny 2 and Pokemon, where well, it's because what's the essential difference between a live service game and a more traditional game, and the idea of expansion of DLC? Because when Destiny 2 came out with expansions or DLC, which was paid, by the way, people weren't up in arms about, oh, there's new content, because, of course, uh, that's the way that a live service game functions. However,
I think. Go on.
however, I feel with the Pokemon case, I think Pokemon serves as an interesting example in the sense of it's a prime candidate for something like a live service game, but it's still more of a traditional game, and it's adding in DLC. And what will DLC then mean for more traditional games and live service games? Because we've seen live service games fail horribly because they were over promising all their DLC. And even like, what does it mean for a live service game to launch? Does it need to launch at $60? I think those are really interesting questions. And could we like I think that those are more interesting things to look into, because in Pokemon's specific situation, there is also the underlying theory, which I've been looking into a little bit, that the last two traditional Pokemon games that released on the Nintendo 3DS sold over 17 million units worldwide. Then Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu releases on the Switch, which is an entirely different take on Pokemon, more adapted from Pokemon Go, and it sells a mere 7 million units. And you might be, boo-hoo, 7 million units, but it's like, compared to 17 million, that's a big difference. And the Switch has been around for, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years around this time. It's been around for quite some time, actually.
Wow.
So if Pokemon still wants to put out a game which is which is a very well-known classic Switch game, like Let's Go Pokemon, Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu will not be the classic success on the Switch because it wasn't. So the theory is that they put out Sword and Shield because then at least they had something which sold well, which so far it sold 10 million units, which is better. It's still not up there with the previous generation. However, that might have meant that this production was a little bit rushed, hence that Dexit happened, hence that there were less Pokemon in there. And now that they're adding in DLC because they've been able to work on more content and they're adding that back in, and so come new Pokemon. Now, the interesting thing to note there as well, because I think that's also a delicate situation, which is more towards the intricacies of the Pokemon game specifically, not necessarily DLC at large, is that they're adding in 200 old Pokemon, to which people might say, well, they're putting that behind a pay gate. They knew that in advance. It's like, on the one hand, maybe. On the other hand, you can still get these Pokemon if you get them through trades, if you get them through like your old system via the Pokemon Cloud. You just can't capture them in those regions. And you might think then, well, that's a little bit unfair, isn't it? Well, let's say that you're fine with people buying expansion passes for new regions. Wouldn't it make sense for those new regions to not have different Pokemon than in the previous regions that you were in? Because, like, why else bother with buying the expansion pack if there aren't different Pokemon? So, in that sense, it makes a little bit more sense. It's just that it's really weird in this situation where it's a very, very fast publishment of a Pokemon game, which is something very different than before, which we talked about in the previous FrameCast, and then kind of comes back with some of these concerns, where I think the concern with Pokemon is way more on the Pokemon that are coming back, and not that they're adding in new story modes and new territories towards a game in an expansion pass. Because if it was just that without a Pokemon, I think the fuss would have been way less. However, if you don't mind, I would love to look more into into DLCs and expansion packs for this year and going into the 2020s, because I think that Pokemon is an interesting example. If, as I said, this topic could have been discussed like 5 years ago when these DLCs became a new thing on like the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, but the fact that Pokemon is doing it right now means that it's a generally accepted thing that developers do, or not necessarily accepted, but a generally known thing that developers do, is that they add in DLC to standard games. And at the same time, we have seen people try their hand and fail horribly or succeed quite well with live service games. However, I'm also seeing more and more disgruntlement with certain well-performing games, including Warframe and Destiny 2, about how they expand and how long they go on. So, what does this mean for both the expanding games of live services? Where do these expansions go? Do they go bigger and bigger and bigger? And can they go bigger and bigger and bigger? And these more standard games, can DLC form a middle ground between these two types of games where it enhances the experience of these games, or does it actually detract from these games if you add in more DLC?
So I've brought up this list, releases.com, and it has like DLCs and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have a great expansive list of DLCs, maybe because developers are reducing the number of DLCs. I don't know. But I think that part of the issue is that publishers will often turn to developers and say, we need you to build this DLC content in mind, right? We need you to, because they want to get the most out of product,
Mm-hmm.
right? The best form of marketing for any game is word of mouth, right? If a game is good enough, people will talk about it. People will turn to, their friends at school, their colleagues at work, their neighbors, and just simply say, "Oh my God, have you played so and so?"
Mm-hmm.
If people like it enough, they'll talk about it. That's what happened in the earlier years of Warframe. But I think that the concept of DLC has been abused, right? The whole premise of DLC was supposed to be you bought it now
Mm-hmm.
at the full retail price, and then you got the stuff that was missing from the game later on as, just free additional content, right? But then publishers saw this as a way of marketing, and they thought, well, maybe we can sort of like cheat it, so to speak. I mean, some of the DLC content that really stuck in my head was Batman Arkham City, the second Batman
Mm-hmm.
Arkham game, and you could get levels as to play as Catwoman. It was one level. It was just one. That was it. And it felt like a huge cheat, right? I'm spending this extra 15 quid on a game to get this DLC for 5 minutes worth of content. What the hell, right? And this is often the case with a lot of games, right? Things like microtransactions have really taken this to a new level. And I think that if a game developer is building a product with DLC in mind, let's look at Warframe, right? Let's say the Railjack expansion is a DLC, let's treat this as a hypothetical. I think that depending on how it is done, how it is executed, it has the potential of winning over people or just completely blowing up in people's faces. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, go on.
I think that there are some very big concepts which we're talking about right now, which really need to be broken down before we continue. Sure. Because I think you were talking about DLC started out as free additions to the game that were, when you bought the game, you would get some extra little bits that you could download extra, and that was a really cool thing. But
no, that wasn't the original concept. The original concept was we as the developer cannot complete the production of the game without having a injection of cash. So we are selling the game now early.
Okay.
So you can give us an injection of cash by buying it, and then later when we finish the extra stuff, you'll be able to download it and finish the game.
Okay. Well, in that sense, it started out like that, and then you were saying the other developers caught on to that, and it turned into some practices where you would buy for a full-fledged expansion. It was just 5 minutes of one single level, and it's like, what did I pay for? And we're seeing these kind of practices with microtransactions as well. And if we're looking at live service games, we can also look at their expansions. I think that, first of all, if we look at the DLC progression or any progression of any sort of system within games or game development, there's always a kind of like swing in finding the right balance or find the right place of this new technology. I think that DLC was a massive impact towards previously having this one thing which no one could change at all, to, hey, we can add things on there because now people have hard drives on any console that they play on, and we can, like, they have an internet connection, we can do this. But what does that mean? Like, what does a DLC mean? I think that that's a really important thing that people before had to figure out. Does it mean that it is something which can later be added to the game, which you just get extra because you already paid for the game? Or is it an extra game? Like, let's say, the way that people describe Pokemon now, like, it could have been an extra game, but right now it's just like an extra piece towards the game, so you buy it. Or is it like, hey, we can take parts of the game and sell it back to the buyer and then earn money? It's like it also balances on the question, like, how should a developer earn money? Should they earn money for like the first initial sale, or should they earn money as they develop on with extra DLCs? So I think that those are some very important things to figure out. But also at the same time, when it comes to live services like Warframe and Destiny, the thing is that I feel that we're really into the swing of figuring out what that is. Because on the one hand, we say that it could really enhance games like Pokemon. On the other hand, I think that we've over the last 2 years really seen developers go overboard with live services and fail really badly. Fallout 76, Anthem, and we're still trying to figure out the place of these games and what their expansions mean and how the developer should be paid for expansions as such within these games. And I think that even when we look at games like Warframe, we still don't know. And I don't think Warframe even really knows what to do with these expansions. So, I
think we need to take real examples, right? We can't just we can't just simply pluck this stuff out of our bum on a hypothetical level. I think we need to look at a practical level where this stuff has been executed.
Okay,
right?
Can I start off with a distinction with an example within it?
Yep.
I think that some very important distinctions to make before moving forward are games that are a self-contained game, like, let's say, Outer Worlds or Persona 4, like mostly story-driven games where it's like the game is released as an entire game with a start and a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
These self-contained games, most of the time, do not get any DLC or anything else because it wouldn't make sense for the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have standard games, which either evolve over time, like Pokemon, where otherwise, like, slightly different iterations would be released over time, or that continue to stay relevant over time through online multiplayer. I think someone mentioned here Red Dead Redemption 2, which did not have DLC, to which the response was, well, the online play is also kind of dead, because what happens with story games where no DLC gets added, it's like, I'm done, and you put it away, you put it on the shelf. Whereas a game like let's say that would happen to something like Fortnite, which might also be more of a live service, but let's say something like Fortnite of Call of Duty, if they were to halt development and not release new maps, it would suffer the online play. So I think that is a more of a gray area where we have more expansions. So continuously relevant standard games, like kind of online games. And then we have live services, which are games that are released as We start off with a base, and the entire idea of this game is that we're continuously building onto this game to grow bigger and bigger, and the game is never really finished. So we have these three distinctions. Would you be fine with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. So let's see first. I think that the entirely separate games are kind of out of this entire discussion because I don't think that they will be getting DLC or we'll see DLC being added to them in the future, because if they wanted to do that, they would have done that by now. It's been out for a long time, this opportunity. They won't. I think that what we're seeing now, and I think Fortnite is a perfect example, with where is the border, where's the line between a live service game and a continuously relevant game? Like Fortnite, is it a live service game? Well, you can't really play the content that's been out for like years ago, especially the Battle Royale mode, which I'm talking about right now. But it is a game which has been around the entire time, and it kind of follows the same core principles. I feel that a game like Call of Duty, whenever it releases every time, is basically the same game, but then with different twists, which could be compared to Fortnite seasons. So I could foresee a game like Call of Duty reasonably be like, instead of releasing full price new games, we could release half price expansions to the base game, which offer different mechanics, different soldiers, different outfits.
So I think the distinction here is the difference between what's a franchise and what is a live service, a game as a service, right? To me, Fortnite is not a franchise; it is a game as a service because it is a multiplayer environment that is constantly getting expanded upon in terms of the PvP or the PvE. Well, I say the PvE, but yeah.
But if we look at the PvP though, you cannot play the map of Season 1 anymore. So you had Season 1, which was an entirely different map from the map that is available now. So if they were to do a Season 3, that would be entirely different again.
But that is the same with games like World of Warcraft, right? So you cannot get the same experience of playing. I was about to say vanilla, but you could play WoW Classic. Playing the earlier versions of the game, you can't get the same experience of playing Burning Crusade, the first expansion, now as you could when it first came out, because the whole system was different, right? You had different hit mechanics, you had different stats. You actually had to level up being able to use your equipment. But in Cataclysm, they removed that, right? So the game has changed over many years, right? Originally, warriors were able to use ranged weapons. They took that away. So games as a service, they can evolve, in my eye, they can evolve to be a completely different beast as they were years ago. Games as a franchise, well, if you pick up Pokemon Red, it's still Pokemon Red today, right? But Pokemon Sword is a completely different iteration, but it doesn't impact Pokemon Red. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in the sense of, if I were to pick up Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, I could play that as a separate thing right now, and then Modern Warfare 3 is a separate thing, and they're both separate things which I can have in my hands and play differently. I do think, though, that a Pokemon Red is a separate, is the first category. And like, I think that that's a really interesting thing with Pokemon, which I'm realizing right now, is that they have never done updates to their thing. So their games which you bought were always just the single stories like game. So yeah. I think that should be, I think that's a different category. But when I look at Fortnite, especially the PvP mode, I'm not talking about the PvE mode.
Sure.
I feel that when it comes to the build mechanics, the fight mechanics, everything that doesn't concern the skins or the map outside of it has largely remained pretty much exactly the same, in the same vein as the Call of Duty multiplayer mode has remained the same over its generations. Of course, there's the campaigns there, but like Call of Duty doesn't really care about them. So I think that they are comparable, where Season 1 could have been, if it wasn't for for the way that it has been published. Could have been Fortnite 1, and then Season 2 could have been Fortnite 2, and it could have been released as a franchise.
I
Would
agree.
it not?
I think it could have been released as a franchise. I think the big thing for Fortnite was it was an attempt to get into the free to play game as a service genre for Epic Games that games like not so much Overwatch, but League of Legends, other esports, right?
Mhm.
Particularly, they were just dominating the field, right? Heck, even Team Fortress 2 became free to play after like X many years, right?
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if when Overwatch 2 comes out, Overwatch becomes free to play, right?
Mhm.
But so this was a tactic done by microphone. This was a tactic being done by Epic Games, and I can completely appreciate and understand how they're trying to do this. But again, you could. The reason why they do it this way is because it can be more profitable than a single shot, a one trick pony. That's what I mean. Like just a one release of the game. Because as you two rightly pointed out in our microtransactions episode, I don't know what was it, our first, second, I don't know which episode it was.
Mhm.
You pointed out that one person spent how much money on that
Over
Transformers game?
they spent over 200,000 Australian dollars on a
Yeah,
Transformers mobile game.
200,000. Right? Could you just imagine you get one person to do that for Fortnite,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we were to sell, I don't know how much a game in Australia goes for, but simple some quick maths. So 200,000
Divided by
and then
60 or something.
yeah, I think 60
Yeah.
is a good number. That's 333. Sorry, 300. My God, how can I not? 3,333 people's worth of purchasing in one person. Stop it, microphone. Stop it. Stay.
So
It's an attempt to get more money.
it is. I feel that. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can get my reasoning correct. So you're saying that Fortnite attempted this free-to-play tactic of continuously having one single service free-to-play online, like some of the games that were previously there, to earn more money through microtransactions sort of behavior, instead of doing the franchise approach.
Yes, that is personally what I think. I mean, there are some games like the FIFA games. I think it was the FIFA games. They have the franchise approach as well as the microtransaction approach. This is where publishers get super fucking greedy at trying to milk their consumer base dry. Right?
So it's interesting that you bring up FIFA, because one interesting thing about FIFA is that the games that come out are $60 at like launch, but a year afterwards are worth nothing because everyone that is interested in them moves on to the next game and the online play just dies. I think that Call of Duty in a sense is a little bit different because I still find a lot of people around on previous releases. But FIFA and those sports games just literally die off. I think that these would be prime candidates if you were to go for a very smooth user experience to become a Fortnite-inspired live service where it just updates to the next year and updates to the next year because there's very little value in the previous entries. However, I think that when it comes to the microtransactions idea behind Fortnite and not choosing to go franchising because not franchising is beneficial for the amount of income one can generate. I think that the way to monetize this approach is one which is very all over. Like, we're still finding a way around it, and I don't know what the best approach is, because on the one hand, I would say when it comes to a better user experience, I'm probably also for a better development cycle, instead of like having to rebuild the same game pretty much up at launch, like every single year. Just continuing to work on the same game and updating it as you go. There are some very serious benefits to games like Call of Duty, Call of Duty, FIFA, or Pokemon if they were to take up that approach. But how do you monetize it then? I think that there are two big issues which come up. It's, do you monetize initially for the work you have put in, and then do you have like an asking price of $60, which so far has not been very successful. You could say Destiny 2 is one of the successful success stories, but they just went free to play. So Anthem did it and failed horribly. Fallout 76 did it and failed horribly. Apparently people do not like to join into a live service when they're expected to pay up front. And as you so say, very rightly, if it's only provide 6 hours of content on launch, then what do I pay this for? And if at that point it would be, okay, you buy into this title and it will update as it goes along, then you can't really expect people to buy your expansion passes if you're telling them to, you pay $60 for an incomplete product, but we're going to update it as we go along, so don't worry, you've already paid for the game. That would make no sense, because that's worth way more than $60. So how do you monetize it then? How do you monetize a live service? Let's say that we like to go towards a live service idea for certain types of games. Not all types of games, not story games, but games like Pokemon, but games like FIFA, franchise games, which would probably be aided in a lot of ways by being live service. How would you do that? And I don't think that microtransactions is entirely the right approach, nor do I think that paying for updates is the entirely right approach, because you see a lot of people being turned off by the Destiny approach, where you have to pay up like $60 every year to add another expansion to it, and everyone in the game moves onto that, and you're kind of stuck in, okay, newbie territory. But then again, the fact that Warframe has been able to pull off to a somewhat successful degree, that they have solely been able to live off microtransactions, doesn't mean that every game does it right. And they might get it wrong sometimes and get away with it. But as we've seen with loot boxes, it's only a matter of time before they will not get away with it anymore. So how would you effectively monetize a live service game with expansions?
So,
You're breaking up massively. Pay $20 if you want Drew to be uncorrupted by the internet. No, I do seriously think that we need an expansion pass on your internet, because it's pretty broken. You're not even moving. Oh no. We still. You've changed frame. Your frame is still the exact same. Hold on. Maybe if I put on my hat, I'd change. Oh my god, we lost him.
No. I moved
He's back
to US East. Am I back proper?
Yeah, you're back. Good.
Okay, I can only just blame Discord for that, because God knows what the hell happened. So I'm going to use a hypothetical of Discord, not Discord, Pokemon. Right,
yeah, Pokemon.
I would make a game as a service version of Pokemon where you oh god. So I'm gonna ask you the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should you have to pay for new regions, right? Now, when I describe a region, I'm not talking about a whole continent like the Kanto region. Let's call it a zone. A zone. Let's break it down. So the zone would include new terrain, right?
Mm-hmm.
New architecture, whatever. New what's it called? New NPCs to battle, right? And a new gym, right? It won't necessarily include new Pokemon, but let's just describe it at that for now. Do you think that should be something that a person has to pay for to access?
I don't know.
What would you like? Would you like it to be free?
So, if I think about it, on the one hand, I would say if I don't necessarily know where this plays into whether I paid for the game initially or not. But here come my two opposing thoughts. On the one hand, I would say yes, you have to pay for it because it is development time that's gone into creating a piece of game which could have been hypothetically sold as a separate game but is now being added towards a game, which is like the idea of a live service. So you pay for the development time because how else would they pay for it? On the other hand, if I look at something like a Destiny 2, it feels like you're getting a game because you're looking at Destiny 2 as an entire game, but you're not getting access to that game because there are several paywalls in the way. And I can, as a more grown-up person, appreciate that there are paywalls for the work that people put in. However, when I just started out with gaming and I had no money to spare and like I would just literally like wait months until I could buy my next game, I would get into free-to-play games or maybe a game like Destiny, and I would really appreciate it if I could continue to play the game until where everyone else was, because if there was a paywall and I couldn't get past it, I just ditched the game because it felt like I wasn't welcome there. And if you look at successes like Fortnite and Warframe, that is something which has worked for them, where everyone can play it. But then it relies more on microtransactions, and I don't know whether I'm a fan of microtransactions. So I'm really split on this. I really don't know.
So this is like listening to what you've just said. This has helped me. Right. First off, I would make the game free. Right.
Okay.
Flat out, you do not have to pay for the game.
Mm-hmm.
I would put hurdles in the way. Right. So, for example, if you want to level up your, if there will be a limit on how many Pokemon you can have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So certainly you can have the 6 that's on your utility belt, but then maybe you can only have a further. Oh God, let's say how many? There are hundreds and hundreds of Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
So probably say like a further 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you can buy 10 slots for real money equivalent. So you can up it 10 each time. Not saying a huge amount, but I can't give you a price. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good with how much like when I just go, nope, not going to deviate. Right. I would then put in cosmetics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could dress up your Pikachu to look like a Charmander. Right, not to be an actual Charmander, but to have like a Charmander onesie, right? You could do things like that. You could customize the appearance of your character, much like you can in the other, the freaking hell. Come on, brain.
Other game.
In Sword and Shield, yes.
Yeah.
I would have it so that maybe there is a loyalty thing, much like the Kubros in Warframe. So you have to keep your Pokemon happy to like you. Maybe that's something that you could just spend real money equivalent. I'm talking like super fucking cheap on that level. Or you could just like play with it like you can in the camps and things, right? So I would have it so that there's stuff you can rush, but new Pokemon, new areas, new gyms, they would all be free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe legendaries aren't subject to the same rule as other Pokemon, so they will always have space in your inventory. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can only go get them once. So does that make sense?
It makes sense to the degree of if you were to make a successful live service approach, and if you were to target people that are interested in a live service game, then this would be very reasonable and understandable tactics in monetizing your game appropriately, where it's not too invading, but you are enticed to pay money and thus support the development of the game.
Mm-hmm.
The thing which I worry about, and this is why Pokemon is I don't know how good of an example it is, because it's only recently, because of this new DLC, entered the territory of potentially like continually relevant games, which we don't even know, because previously Pokemon games where you bought the game and that was the game. I have found myself on a severe dislike of live service games over the past couple of months. Because, as I said, when I grew up, I didn't have a lot of money, and thus a lot of free-to-play games really spoke to me. And also mobile games came up around the time they spoke to me. And a lot of these free-to-play games have tactics like this. They're like continuously active. They're kind of games as a service, and you can pay up, and that's how they make their money. However, a direct result of the idea of a free-to-play live service game is that I found very clearly that their goal is not to entertain you. Their goal is to keep you playing for as long as possible. And initially, that the difference of that rank of objectives might not be noticeable to you. It might not be noticeable to you at all. If you enjoy playing the game, then that's satisfactory. However, I've really started to notice when I was really deep into Warframe, really deep into mobile games, and I was like, hold on. All these games, what they give me is never a satisfaction. They will always shine at you with colors and like kind of like complete objectives, because completing objectives feels good, but the objectives will always keep coming. There's never an end to them. And that is something which I don't know whether I would like that within a Pokemon game, and I don't know whether I would like that in the majority of games if we're looking towards moving from a franchise towards turning a franchise into something more of a live service, because of the added benefits to that. I think that it's also very important to note that the idea of microtransactions only works if people will continuously be playing it, because if you only need to craft like 10 things, like you might rush 10 things, but then you will never pay up again. So like the idea is to incentivize you to continue to encounter these obstacles and then be enticed to pay up. And then the goal of the game needs to be shifted towards not enticing you to be continuously and like not getting you to and have an enjoyable experience, but to have you play for as long as possible, which will most definitely include trying to get you the most enjoyable experience. But as a result, Nightwave in Warframe, the season pass, will never end. You will always be able to keep on going, because there will always be objectives. Because if you don't have objectives, like you might quit. We can't have you quit. So I think that is a very interesting point of conflict where there might be a huge problem, because I don't think most of the players or every player is interested in having that experience in a majority of the games.
I think the big thing is the distinction of difference between PvE and PvP, because PvP games effectively they pay for themselves. You know, you put because every PvP experience is ever so slightly different, and it's enough to keep the player base going. You just got to, I'll just throw in another character. Oh yeah, there's another character. Oh, it's so cool, right? But I totally get where you're coming from, right? Like, I would detest if Nier Automata was a game as a service, because I loved the plot. I loved the thing that they focused on the most, which was the plot, right? And I completely appreciate it. Like, if you don't want to play a game because you don't feel like you're progressing anywhere, right? Then why would you never ride downhill? Why would you always push uphill to get no sense of satisfaction of going downhill again? So maybe Pokemon should never be a game as a service. Maybe even Pokemon should never have DLC stuff. Maybe it should just be a blank slate each time, each new generation, each new iteration of the franchise. But go on.
I think I'm trying to think. I think it's a value proposition because I don't know. Do you feel? Have you bought any Destiny 2 expansions?
Yes.
Did you feel you got your money's worth, or were you
No.
satisfied with these expansions?
Fuck no. No, not in the slightest.
All right. Well, at least there is a large amount of people that is satisfied with the value that they get out of it because every time they continue to buy them. So it's somewhat successful, but we both objective. I've never bought one, and I have some objections to buying them. I haven't, like, the threshold is still too high for me.
To jump in here, there are instances where expansions or DLCs are done right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Personally, I think World of Warcraft, its expansions / DLCs, is downloadable content, are done right because you are paying a what's it called? Oh no, I can't use that. I was going to use that example. I can't because it's got a subscription behind it. I
Yeah.
apologize, everyone. I can't use that example. What other games have I bought where the DLC was worth it? That's a really good question. I am struggling to think of any.
I think that when it comes to the DLC market, especially okay, so like what rubbed me the wrong way with Destiny 2 is that you originally had the $60 entry price, and then you had to have continuous, pretty decent like game prices for DLCs that were added on or expansions that were added on, in addition to that it has microtransactions within the game. So it has both the entry price and the expansion price and also the microtransactions. And if you contrast that to the game which I was by that time playing, which was Warframe, which was completely free and everything was accessible throughout playing it without spending a dime, it was a fair bit contrast, and I wasn't so sure whether the value I would get out of spending that money would be worth my dime. However, I think that it is I think that the value proposition is really important in this thing, and I think that there's hardly any game that has found it yet, and I don't think Warframe has found it either, because Warframe is a really interesting story right now to see how that will develop. But first, where would that value be found? I think that games franchise games, which we were talking about, like Pokemon, like Call of Duty, like FIFA, could very well do with a live service approach because their games over time are very, very similar and could work in a continual lineage where things would be added on. But where would this expansion, how would that be paid for? I think that if we were to have a Pokemon live service, the way that we envision it being this large world, it would just be one world where like you'd have all the Pokemon worlds from before kind of like together, and you could move to the different regions because it's on one giant world. You could move to the different regions and play the story there. You could start off by buying into like the first into like whatever region you'd want to, and then you could go on to other ones. I think that if every region was locked behind $60 or $50 because it's on the same engine this time, it's on an entire new thing, you don't have to buy the disc anymore, I think that that would be a satisfying price for me to buy the expansion for, because it's basically a different it's basically I would buy that as a separate game, but right now it's just that exact game, but then on this live service I would buy that for $50. I think that I would have no problem with that. I think that as long as the value behind it, if you're selling something for a full retail price, the value behind it should be a full retail game, in my opinion. So I think that that could work, but there have been very few examples that have worked well that way.
Yeah, so one example that was given in chat from Sentient Hemp, F for me, was Warcraft 3. So Warcraft 3 had an expansion, which was the Frozen Throne.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge deal. That was like basically a game in and of itself added on top. Blizzard used to be like really good when it came to DLC content with StarCraft, with Warcraft 3, so on and so forth. Then came the money grubbers, and it became a lot more about the money than it did anything else. A la, perhaps the StarCraft 2 being episodic, so you didn't need to buy any of the previous expansions in order to play it, right? Which is it just detracted from it, right? So the narrative was only about one faction, which sucked, right? Then there's Destiny 2, like, oh cool, I've just spent I don't know how much money on Forsaken, and I completed it in an afternoon. So what is this even? And again, likewise, your complaint about how free games as a service are the amount of time you sink into those games are absolutely, like, okay, I don't have that much of an issue with Warframe, but I did have a huge issue with Heroes of the Storm. They wanted you to play every bloody day, right? They would continuously run time-limited events that if you weren't constantly running, then you just massively lose out. And in the end, like, people just like, no, I can't be fucked to deal with this. Like, I'd rather, not have to fight an uphill battle, right? So maybe this is the wrong choice for Game Freak to do with Pokemon, but I really think the value comes from the quality of the work that they produce.
I think that there's a couple of things when you're talking about the episodic nature of StarCraft and the more focused on money taking practices that came later on. There are some intricacies there, like franchises that span a really long time are great for people that grew up with it, but form a huge barrier of entry for people that are trying to get into it. And as such, it is very refreshing for them if they can just join in and they don't have to go back to things because this is just a separate installment. It has something in common with these other games which you can try or these other things which you can try, but you can just jump in and you don't have to do everything, but you can just do this thing now. I think that there is a very important element in that as well. And when it comes to the money hungriness of developers and the not so creative ways later on, I think we've touched on that a couple of framecasts ago as well, that coming up with a really good creative idea is really tough to do, let alone several times in a row. So something which has been really creative and successful has no guarantee of being as creative and as successful with further installments or further additions towards it, while at the same time it does have a fan base and a repertoire on which it can make money. And then at that time, like, the availability of making more money might be more enticing, or it might be that you're still buying the same thing, except this time it hasn't been as original or as successful because, well, it's not going to be as easy to be that way. So you perceive the value of what you got as way less because it wasn't as good, but it's basically what it would have done back then, but then it was just not as good. So I think that there are some intricacies there, but I think it's a really important thing, especially with the idea of like this Pokemon live service game or franchise live service games. Like, the idea is magical of having like this one giant Pokemon world where you can switch between the regions. But on the other hand, if I were to join in with Sword and Shield, then I would see this entire world locked up, like from going back to Pokemon Red and stuff. It's like, yeah, I don't know how I would feel about that. So I think that's definitely an interesting point. Is it worth it? Then again, at the same time, is it is it not about the way it's portrayed? In the sense of if I buy into Pokemon Sword and Shield now, the only reason that I'm not like, oh my god, I haven't played up all the way back to Pokemon Red is because there's no mention of those games within that game. And if I were to have this live service and there would be an entire area like grayed out then that would be like, that would feel bad. But what if there would be no mention of it unless like you buy an expansion and boom, all of a sudden you can only see 2 regions? Then would that not like mediate the suffering? Suffering is a bad word, but the only word I can come up with.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like I don't. I mean, part of the problem from my perspective is that I've started with this stuff, right? I haven't picked up anything part way through. Maybe Final Fantasy 14, but even then I picked it up before the first expansion. But like part of the issue here is that I played Pokemon from the first iteration. I played it with Pokemon Red. It was the first ever Pokemon game I ever played, and I thought it was bloody brilliant. But likewise, World of Warcraft is a case. That is 15 years old, and I think people can still as readily pick it up today, not have to worry about any of the expansion stuff, any of the lore elements or raid gear or any of that stuff haven't already got, because one of the nice things about World of Warcraft is with its expansions, when you pick it up, you can get a level boost to jump a brand new character or any character to the beginning of the expansion, right? You can even buy those from Blizzard, but that's by the by. I think that games of a service aren't necessarily something to be concerned about in terms of picking it up partway through the lifespan rather than at the beginning of the lifespan. I think, if anything, it's about how the content is tailored to such a broad audience, because games like again Warframe, they are built to specification dictated by the user base, right? The only reason why we have Parkour 2.0 is because there were quite a number of people Zoran coptering, right? Could you just envision that for Pokemon? Pokemon has always been this, we have the idea in our heads. We have the model of what the player will do. We have the user journey all mapped out, right? But then what happens when it would, in theory, become a game as a service, and then people can go, oh no, I think Charmander should be stronger than Squirtle, because people like Charmander over Squirtle. Yeah. So I think it's a double-edged sword when it comes to games as a service that maybe DLC content does not have.
In the sense of, because a game is like Pokemon Sword and Shield is a self-contained unit, given that an addition will not be subject to years long of user generated feedback and tweaks and all the long dreaded problems that live services might have, because it's just an expansion to one game, and it's just basically the developer, this is what it is, and now we'll move on. It has more solidity to it because it's just the vision of the developer.
Yeah. So exactly. So if the vision, so the big thing is, like, when you are trying to develop something, you spend ages trying to work it out, and we can see like Fortnite is another good example. Fortnite was originally based on the PvP premise that you would be one of 4 players that is building a fortress to survive a zombie horde, right? But then some bright spark at Gearbox decided, hey, let's just shove in Battle Royale, and bam, the Battle Royale exploded, right? And then they just neglected the PvP side of it entirely. Games as a service, they have the spaghetti of ideas, they throw it at the wall, and whatever sticks, they develop.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that one of the things that you mentioned about the beauty of live services is that like the users can like feedback in, and only if it's done well, like with Warframe, this can produce great results. But if it's done poorly or it makes no sense, then like yeah, it will fail. I think that one of the things which should be heavily considered is our personal experience with Warframe and our
Hmm.
personal growth with it, because I think that I personally think that Warframe is in a really interesting spot right now because
I'm gonna call it out. It's not in an interesting spot. It's in a very difficult spot. It's
no,
in a very
it's in an interesting spot because we might see whether this one pillar or one of the few pillars of live service which people have always pointed to of how well it's doing might actually be showing symptoms of becoming too large for its base in a
yeah.
sense. So what I mean with that is uh, there's not me saying Warframe is dead. It's just saying it's really interesting to see what's going to happen. Because what you're saying about the beauty of Warframe, about parkour, that we grew up with that, it's awesome if you started out with Warframe and you grew up and they changed it based on feedback, which people commonly shared or made sense that people had. Even if you disagreed, it made sense that people had that opinion. However, if you were to join the game right now, it would make no sense for you that there's something like Frame Fighter. It would make no sense for you that there's something like Clem. It doesn't have the same relative ideas behind it because you didn't grow up with it. You take it as the game as it is, and it's one giant mess. But that's pretty much a side point to all of this because the idea of games as a service is that they continually add on and the expansions attract new players and like it makes the game bigger and it makes the game better. However, what is really interesting with Warframe right now, especially with the introduction of Railjack, is that what they've thrived on is initially with small repeating updates, which eventually grew bigger and bigger and bigger, with larger time spans in between. Because they grew bigger, they attracted more people each and every time. I think that this peaked with we saw the big spark, initial spark with the Second Dream, but this peaked with Plains of Eidolon and then Fortuna. And why did it peak with that? Was because Plains of Eidolon brought the idea of open world to people. And it didn't necessarily mean like it not necessarily focused on what the expansion was. It was just that people saw this game what it was for the entire time, and then a concept was brought to mind which no one has ever thought of, and then it was like, can you imagine? And then they did it, and it was an entirely new thing, and people liked it or hated it, but it brought a lot of attention to it, and the player base grew. And then they did it again with Fortuna. I think the spike was a little bit less, but at the same time, it still broke records because it was, again, like, what would an open world do to a game like this? And it's bigger and better than the previous one, so it drew a lot of attention. However, what we're seeing right now is that what can be developed within a year or within a reasonable span amount of time is, I think that there is a peak which has been reached, and at the same time, what kind of concept can be as game breaking as there is lore or there is an open world, and Railjack might have been a potential answer to that, has it not been that it has not reached that same peak, and as such, Railjack might have been another additional example which points out that games as a service that are searching out for what will be the next big expansion might have this amazing trajectory of the story gets added on, or it might run the risk of we're having something here, something there, something here, something there, something here, something there, and it ends up being a giant mess where the next thing will never be able to be bigger than the previous thing because the previous thing was already so big. As a result, like, we haven't had the spike at all, and the Steam charts are kind of going down, which I'm interested to see what their next move is, but I think that Warframe is in a really interesting position because we have never seen live services go this long. And yeah, I don't know, I spoke a lot. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Like, to be honest, when Destiny 2 hit the Steam charts, running the 1st of October, it blew up massively. But since then, since mid-October, it's been kind of on a downward trend, right? And I would kind of expect that again with Warframe as well. These games, they suffer like ups and downs nearly constantly. And I think that one of the important things for us as gamers is to be able to take the opportunity to go play something else. Like I've said with Heroes of the Storm, having to play it 24/7 is killer, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's not 24/7, but you had to play it every day, right? You had to play it every day for a few hours, which was killer,
Mm-hmm.
right? At least with Pokemon, I can put it down before I pick it up again, right? At least with oh god, trying to think of another game. So I've recently been playing Children of no, is it Children of Mana? Shit, what's it called? Children of Mortar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a game I totally recommend for everyone. It's currently on Steam. It is a amount of money. It's less than £20. It is a really good game. They do actually have a development roadmap for the future. You know, it's fun. But the big thing is that I can pick it up and put it down when I want, right? But games like Warframe, there are so many people that feel that they have to keep playing it nearly constantly. And I get that. Games like Overwatch, games like League of Legends, there are all these games out there. Games as a service that I feel exploit their audience far too much and force them to do stuff that, as you have put it, like, a never-ending string of goals that
Mm-hmm.
or hurdles that just like, where the fuck is the end? At some
because
point in time,
because
you just
that's
want
their
to stop.
primary goal. It's
Yeah, to
like that
keep you
is
playing.
that they need to keep their audience playing, because if they don't, people won't spend money for microtransactions, and where's the development being paid for at that point? However, I think what we're seeing with games like Destiny and games like Warframe, live service games, the idea behind the franchise, I think that the franchise games suffered the same fate uh, years ago, and I think that we might be seeing a very interesting development in the next few years, especially indicated by my tracking of like what has the Railjack launch meant for Warframe, is that um and yeah, we're talking about Warframe now. Wow. Anyway, what does the Railjack launch mean for Warframe? It's, as you point out, people force themselves to play a game. Why? Because that's the objective of the game, to keep you playing for as long as possible. Now, if you start out right at the start when the live service starts, or 1 or 2 years later, mostly the games have been very unexplored by that point. You still have very much linear based content, because within the first 2 years, you're not going all too wild as a developer. You still have your vision of what you want for it, and the game is just adding on and adding on. It's like a game you can step in and things are being added on. However, I think that some of the high points where Warframe peaked, where people said like, wow, awesome, was with Arkwing's introduction initially. The reaction afterwards was not great, which added to this fighter game on the ground with 4 people in missions, added the layer of flying through space. Then the next peak was the second dream, the cinematic quest, which added to this kind of generic game with some interesting elements but not a lot of lore. All of a sudden, a cinematic lore entry, which then had a massive success, which then also had a success with the war within the follow-up quest. And then their big peaks came with the open worlds, which put you from hallways to open worlds, and the follow-up open world was also pretty good, real well received. Now it's ships in space, but as you can tell, it's becoming harder to find what is the next big thing, and how big can the next big thing be, given what we're seeing right now, also with increased development times and larger update sizes. It's like, how big is too big, and is Railjack big enough? I think it was released very early, but it had been in development for a really long time, so it kind of had to be released. Um, but the interesting thing, oh, go ahead.
I disagree with that mentality. It'd been in development for a very long time, thus it had to be released. That's the mentality that led to Anthem's floppage. You know,
But do you not think that that is what could have potentially been one of the reasons why it came out at the time that it did?
I think the big thing was that they wanted to release something that maybe their investors wanted to release something that was the update for Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
right? Railjack wasn't really finished, which
Mm-hmm.
is understandable. I think no one here denies the fact that Railjack is a bare bones system, right? To me, it's not an MVP system because I have felt more enjoyment playing the Kuva liches than I have Railjack, right?
Absolutely, I agree.
Um, I just feel that the Railjack system it's too sparse, right? Engineer. Not going into this conversation. We're sticking with
But
DLCs and stuff like that.
like this is what I think with the problem with live services is that creatively, I think that if you look at the idea of Arcwing and cinematic quests and then open worlds, they were far more brand new things like you can go into space. Oh, there's lore. Oh, there's an open world towards. Oh, there's now ships in space, which is still a cool idea, but like again, kind of similar to you can go into space. So it's not a big ass seller, but at the same time, what we're seeing is that what sold the planes was that it's a brand new big expansion, and then Fortuna was even bigger than Plains of Eidolon, and it had to be like because like it's not a great sell if you say it's 1.5, it's only half the size, but it's still fun. It's like it's a tougher sell. So they wanted like the idea is like it goes bigger, and you've seen that with Warframe. You have very small updates over a very short time span, and they became bigger, and the wait took longer. However, there is a point in which the wait to content ratio becomes too long, and I think that we've had with that the point had been hit with Railjack, where the wait to a big content release had been expired to a point where either developers, most likely not, or the community, or investors, or someone felt that it was required. There needed to be an update around Christmas time, still in 2019, which was a big sizable update for Warframe, and that became Railjack. However, the size of Railjack turned into it being not a completely finished product. And I think that at that point, it's like, was the update too big at that point? Was like it's an interesting point because it's not like Fortuna was to PoE, or PoE was, or like the War Within was to Second Dream. So I think that it does have to do with it needed to come out because the wait was too long and the update was too big to come out at that point in time. And then it's like, well, I think also like one of the things which just baffles me to no end is that like people stick around for 7 years to this game, like we did. A lot of people here have been sticking around for a long time, and it's like, yeah, you can play something else, but the thing that people did is a really long time. It's insane. At the same time, the fact that there's so much content to keep people entertained for such a long time means that there's a lot of stuff out there which hasn't, because the way that Warframe has been developed has been all over the place, which means that it's a really tough game, most likely, I can imagine, for new players to get into. And like the relevancy of a game is also something which needs to be kept in mind, in the sense of when Fortnite just came out, it's like the battle royale thing, it's shut up and it's been declining. I think that season 2 gave it a peak again and it's been declining because everything declines. As long like if Pokemon Sword and Shield were endlessly adding on DLC, like it would still be on the declining rate. That's why they release new games.
At some point in time, like, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if it. Okay, so one comment. Yes, I agree with everything you have said about Warframe. I think that Railjack could have done with another 3 to 6 months in the oven before it came out. And I think that the game is no better off, no worse off for releasing Railjack at Christmas. Right? I think, given the Steam numbers, I think it's a little too
well, like, okay, so funny you mentioned the Steam numbers. I
don't want to linger on that. I want to move on to other points about the DLC stuff. Sorry, I'm aware of the time and things. I want to see if anyone has questions and stuff. Apologize. Right. The other point I want to make, which is more important, is your point of DLC stuff. I am super surprised that Destiny, when it came out on Steam, Forsaken, was not free with the base game, right? The base game became free a year after the game came out, when Forsaken came out shortly afterwards, right? But when it hit Steam, base game was free, but Forsaken wasn't. So my thought is, what happens in a year, in 8 months, 9 months time, when another expansion, another DLC to Destiny hits? Do you still have to buy Forsaken? Right?
I don't know. I think that that will be an interesting thing to see. I would expect that it would be free at that point because it had a 2-year life cycle. However, like again, this is if you look at it from like you started out with Destiny, and like the story of Destiny, and it's being added on. It's amazing for you to experience. Just like Mass Effect 2 and 3 were amazing to people that started out with Mass Effect 1. But I never played the original Mass Effect trilogy. I played Andromeda because I wanted to play now, and I wanted to play something which came out which was relevant, but I didn't want to lag behind. So like if Destiny comes out with a new DLC, will people still be interested in these stories? One thing which is really interesting with Destiny is now if you play for free, you start out on Steam or anywhere, you're being thrown to the hub, and you can choose to do the initial free stories, but you don't have to do the first, second, and third in order anymore. And you're being like thrown in at power level 750, which is really interesting. It's like,
just to add, that was super confusing, but keep going.
so basically the idea was if you started off 2 years ago or 1 year ago of Destiny when it just became free, you started off with level 0, power level 0, and you had to play for the initial story, the very first gameplay quest of Destiny, and then you could buy into the second one, third one, and then Forsaken. You had to kind of play it in order and get your power level up. Now, if you start out as a brand new account, don't quote me 100% on that because I'm 99% sure that is this case, but maybe Destiny 2 aficionados can be like, aha, you're wrong. If so, please tell me. But if I'm not mistaken, you start out right now in a hub, like a central place, at power level 750, which is kind of like the baseline where everyone is on, and then like you move on beyond that. And then you can choose to go to characters that will give you the initial starter quest, and then you can choose to do that campaign. It's no longer that you start out and then do that campaign and do that campaign, do that campaign. You can also just start out and start doing Forsaken or start doing the new expansion, and that will be the start of the game for you, which is interesting.
That is correct. I don't know about Shadowkeep, right? I believe that you can do that. The difficulty that I find, and it's something similar that Warframe suffers, that as soon as you log into the game of Destiny, you're like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I'm confused. And you have to find a character on the exact opposite side of the hub in order to pick up the quests, right? The campaigns, the first 3. So that's the vanilla campaign, Warmind, and Tomb of Osiris. Tomb of Osiris? I think it's Tomb of Osiris.
Like that.
Right. But the sorry, just to highlight something that Arturia is saying, Shadowkeep did not require Forsaken at launch. That is completely and utterly not true, because people couldn't buy Forsaken for a while, and yeah, blah 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 blah. I'm sorry, that's not true. Fridge. What was I saying?
You were talking about how you had to go to the other side of the map to buy to get the quest.
But the biggest point that I want to make, which I think would seriously impact Pokemon, right? Pokemon Sword and Shield, in terms of these expansions, is what happens when they do another expansion, right? Will the first 2 islands in the first expansion pass, so will the first expansion pass worth of content become free to play? Will they always expect you to buy the extra DLC content? will the game's baseline of 50 quid suddenly become 100 quid in order to play the whole game? Right? Do you see what I'm saying?
I think that if I think I think that this is the big doubt which is in everyone's minds when it comes to Pokemon because they haven't done this before. If they were to do a second DLC, what does it mean? Because then we don't know what it means because it's an entirely new territory. But if they were to just do this one DLC instead of like the third game, which they've always done, then I think that nothing necessarily changes. It's just that they don't do the third game. But it's like if they do a then like if they do a second DLC, then it's like, are they trying to do live service? Are they trying to like we don't know what that means at that point. And at that point, I don't know whether the game will decrease in value, the base game, or like I don't know. It depends on what happens at that point. I think that Pokemon is also a really interesting example for the idea of live services. We've offered in this episode a lot of support for franchises like Pokemon, like Call of Duty, like FIFA to see if the live service model would fit them, and we thought that there would be many benefits to it. However, as I'm just realizing with talking through Warframe and Destiny 2, as amazing as it is to continuously play through the game, because it makes no sense that you have to buy a separate game to continue on in the next installment when you can also just update it. Like, how crazy is it that you have to buy the same thing over and over again when you can just add on to the same thing? It makes no sense. But at the same time, if I buy Pokemon Sword and Shield right now, but it would have been a live service game. If I buy into Pokemon Sword and Shield right now, but in order to actually play it, I would have to start off with Pokemon Red or the very first Pokemon, and then play my way all the way up to like Pokemon Sword and Shield to actually then play Pokemon Sword and Shield. That would make no sense either. That would be crazy. Yeah. And I think that is what we're starting to see with games like Warframe and Destiny 2, like live service games that have been running for a while, which they really have to find a way to overcome, is that this timeline, which initially supported them very much, that, oh my god, this just adds on and adds on, is starting to become a bit of a problem. Because it's kind of like, if you want to play the new thing that's out, you have to start off at the Game Boy era. It makes no sense. Yeah. It is crazy.
I think that we're going to start seeing that be an impact on Warframe really soon, because like the game doesn't really kick off its narrative until you are doing the second dream, right? That's typically around the 30 to 50 hour mark, right? There's no way to get that any shorter. And, you know, so the plot doesn't really, you don't feel any substance until that late in the game. And I know plenty of people that have picked up Warframe and go, okay, that's cool, but there's way too much for me to do. I'd rather not spend that much time on it. So I completely get it. Right? But one thing that's really interesting is how Blizzard have done the World of Warcraft expansions, right? I don't know exactly when they started this. I think it may have been Cataclysm. I know certainly by Mr. Pandaria. So let me give you numbers. So there was vanilla. The first expansion was the Burning Crusade. The second expansion was Wrath of the Lich King. The third expansion was Cataclysm. And the fourth expansion was Mr. Pandaria. So by the third expansion, or definitely the fourth one, they started including the older expansions in the game. So when you bought World of Warcraft for £10, you got all the expansions bar the current one, right? So that way you're not spending oh god, let me just quickly do some quick math.
Well, you're not spending the base game plus all the expansions that come afterwards.
Yes. But, so say
my question is not just the concern. Well, my question now is like, it's not just the concern of monetary investment. It's also the concern of relevancy and mind investments. Like, how long does something in a game need to be relevant? Or can it be relevant? Because I don't know how World of Warcraft has done this, but if you release something like an expansion in like 2013, and like Warframe, like, I'm really beginning to appreciate the way that Warframe, like, side develops, even though it's becoming a blithering mess. But let's imagine that there is a piece of content which is introduced in 2014 as an expansion, which is like a high point of an expansion because it's a big thing. And then 10 years later in 2023, you get another expansion, but that's based off the storyline from, like, that expansion. Even if that expansion is free, like, you're still going to have to play for it, and you're still going to have to keep it in mind. Like, that's a massive task. I don't care if it's free or not, but, like, I don't think I can commit.
I disagree. I don't think you have to play it at all because
Well,
I
that
think
depends.
no.
Because
So this is actually relevant right now.
Mhm,
So the second expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, right,
mhm,
came out in 2008, I think.
mhm.
So I'm trying to get my mic to stop moving up, and it's just like not wanting to play ball. Mike, stop. There we go. So Wrath of the Lich King was the second expansion, and when it came out,
Mhm,
it was the highlight of it was the highest peak of the game.
mhm,
At the end of the
mhm,
expansion, you as a champion, along with 19 other champions, I think it was 10 or 25. So you and 9 other champions, and a named character called Tyrion Fordring, end up killing Arthas Menethil. Right?
mhm,
He was the Lich King.
mhm,
Right? But the Scourge always had to have a Lich King. And then another character by the name of Bolvar Fordragon ended up putting the Ice Crown on his head so he could maintain control over the Scourge. Bring it to in a few months' time, and I think it's
mhm.
coming out apparently in April or actually no, I think it's like late this year or something like that. We have World of Warcraft Shadowlands.
Mhm,
And the plot is Sylvanas Windrunner takes the crown from Bolvar's head,
mhm,
which happened, 10 years ago, and she breaks it in half. So anyone that's played Warcraft 3 would turn around and go like, who the fuck is this?
mhm.
Right? Anyone that plays the Warcraft 3 remake, which again is coming out, I think it's later this month, they all play Warcraft 3 and the Frozen Throne, which is the expansion that comes with it. They come to fighting. They go, oh, I'm getting into this. Oh, I really like this. I'm going to play some World of Warcraft. Oh, I don't care that it looks stupid. Oh, I'm going to play it.
Mm.
Who the fuck is that? It's going to confuse the shit out of them. But I think the only real solution is to find out from things like wikis, right? There is so much lore behind Warcraft. It is insane,
Mhm,
right? There are, God, probably about 24 books, right? Stuff that has relevancy to the game, right? But none of the plot is put in the actual game itself. So the only way to find out is to read the book.
mhm.
So I think the only way to actually keep up with this stuff is not to play the game from scratch. Hell, you can't even do vanilla anymore because they retconned it with not retconned it, but they overwrote it with Cataclysm. So the events of Cataclysm is the first starting point, right? So yeah, it's all over the fucking place, man.
Well, it's like the lore discussion is an entirely separate thing where I think we've talked about a little bit in previous FrameCasts about like how lore could be integrated, what counts as canon within the game, and all that stuff. But I think that one of the criticisms where we talked about in the previous 10 o'clock, which is not this FrameCast, but 10 o'clock, check out 10 o'clock as well, was I was talking with Laz about this, that one of the shortcomings of Warframe, which makes it feel like all over the place and all islandy like, is that systems that are being introduced do not acquire to something further down the line. So
Yeah.
an open world that's introduced has no relevancy later on in the game. It's there, you do everything in this open world, and then you leave it alone. And a railjack thing well, maybe that might bring a change, but so far, Arcwing or any other systems that have been introduced have never been relevant in like the story progression. It's always been like you play this and then you go back to the story. You play this, you go back to the story. You don't need any of it, and because of it, one of the things that like end game players between quotation marks are running up against is that there's not a lot of depth to things because like everything is just a bit sideways and you don't need it for something. However, let's imagine that you have this game where these errors would be fixed, where you would go for, you start off, let's say as a Warframe, as like one Warframe, one fighting character, and then you play for a quest, and then you find out about your true nature, and then you learn to deal with that nature, and you gain new talent tree systems, and then you find out about new places, and the things you get from these places are really important to go to the next place, and then to the next place, and then you get new things, and you can go into space, and in this space, you acquire new abilities and new things which you need for the next mission and the next mission. If that's the way that the game is being developed, which a lot of people would like for Warframe, then if that goes on 10 years down the line, then for the next Warframe expansion, you would need to have the focus system, you would need to have Railjack, you would need to have Arcwing, you would need to have and like such a long list that you would require to start all the way at the start in order to catch up. Now, you could say that, well, before you do this, you get a care package where everything all of that is in it because that's what you start off with, and like that's been all the way in the past. But doesn't that at that point then override the past, and doesn't that like make a big like sort of serve as a big problem as like either something is relevant, or at that point it's like, oh, you get a care package, so all the people that played all these expansions and stuff, well, screw you, you could have all just gotten this as a package. So it's like, it's such a weird thing,
I would modify Warframe in a couple of different ways. First off, it has to be both of these things. It can't just be one of them. One, a care package that allows you to skip from after Vor's Prize to right at the foot of the Natar quest, right? That is one thing. So you go from Earth, and all of a sudden you've unlocked everything up till Uranus, right? Then, I would also modify the nodes, right? I would reduce the number of nodes that take you from Earth to Venus. Right, so you'll finish off Vor's Prize, you get to Venus, and then you have to get to Mercury. I would change it so that maybe there's only 2 nodes that are between you and the junction of Mercury, right? And vice versa. There's only 2 nodes between. I think there's actually only 1 node between you, so Earth and Mars. 2 nodes between Mars and Ceres. The reason for this is so that, yeah, okay, I get the point of how to play Warframe. I don't need to do this grind before I can get to the fun stuff. And I would dramatically lower the requirements of the junctions. Yeah?
But
so instead of...
that kind of plays into the problem of relevancy because, like, what you're describing is reducing the amount of lead-up time towards certain important things, including the second dream. I 100% appreciate that because like the second dream is really important for people to like have emotional attachments to things. However, the idea of the live service game, as far as we have appreciated Warframe as such, is that it adds on to the game which we appreciated. So we started off with Warframe, and then the second dream was added onto that. But Warframe was already relevant to us, and then there was the second dream being added to it. Now, though, because like we're so further ahead, we declare that this part of the game is no longer relevant, or like has decreased relevancy, so we can smollen the grind. And it's like, at what point can you say that? And at what point does it mean that, well, I mean, at this point we're so far ahead that in the story that like we already know long ahead that we're this thing, and like this entire thing with our mother person is no longer relevant in the story at all because we're all the way into the other side of space because we're 10 years ahead into the future and we're talking about way different things. We're just going to condense the entire Nata thing to let's just do one quest where you're like, oh, I'm this. Oh, you seem not very nice. You're going to betray me. Bye. Because right now that's no longer relevant. Otherwise, you're going to have to play for 10 years of content. It's like at that point, don't we lose the inherent value of the game, which was created back in the day to in service of keeping the new thing relevant to people that want to enter in. And at that point, could you not rather say this live service thing has run its course, let's preserve it as it is, and let's make another entry point where we're starting anew again. And if you want to have a little bit more in-depth, you can go back because it's kind of base of what we did, but you don't need to know because it's a brand new thing. You can start out again.
I don't think you can say let's start anew. If you were to turn to me and say, "Oh yeah, we're gonna start your Warframe account fresh on Warframe 2," I'll be like, "Nope, I'm done. I don't care."
But imagine that that it's not you because like we have this entire history with 7 years of this game. But let's say that I have never gotten into World of Warcraft, and I think there's a big barrier of entry for me in World of Warcraft because there's so much that I have missed out on. I think that with Warframe, it's also very essential for people that like that are brand new to this. They're like, this game's been running for 7 years. Oh my god! And it's the solution. They've tried the solution of putting this at the start, the new content at the start for new players, but that's never satisfied the end game players. If they put it at the end all the time, which makes more sense for the people that have been around, then it becomes a far more. It's the same problem that like. All these franchise games, like, why there's only 3 Mass Effects? Because if they made 20 of them, people wouldn't play 20 because only a small number stick around until the end of 20, and I'm never going to pick up a game that says Mass Effect 20, and I think that we're running into the same thing with live services as well.
I agree entirely. However, so say we got a new player, right? Their experience of Warframe does not detract from my experience of Warframe. If they can get to the second dream within 8 hours, right, that does not belittle the fact that I'm still MR27.
But it's not about your experience. It's about, let's say, what makes Pokemon great is that you can go into the wild woods and then catch your Pokemon and then train them up a little bit. And then, like, go to the first gym and then go to the next gym. Like, that's the magic of Pokemon. Like, you grow up a little bit.
Yeah.
But now imagine that it's like, oh, yeah, so you just wake up and you get all your badges straight away because, if you're going to have to go for that would take too much time. So you're just going to get all your badges and then you're going to get told this little thing. And then you're just going to get all these Pokemon from the next series because you kind of just need to skip on ahead to this point in time because otherwise this would take you way too much time. It's like, it's not for the experience of you, it's for the experience of the new player. Like, we're telling them to skip all this grind and play in Warframe up to the second dream because in the grand picture right now, that's no longer relevant. Whereas when we started out, that thing was the charm of Warframe. And I feel that if you take this approach and you apply it to a longer scale, then how much are you going to be sacrificing, or how big is the thing that you're going to be like cutting short and sacrificing to serve to make this new thing more accessible? And then how long is something relevant for until it's prone to just be cut down and then served away? And then if we're going to be cutting up many different parts of the game into very like slimmed down parts so people can speed through to get to the point where the game is currently, then isn't it like a loss of the original quality? And isn't it better preserved if you then say, if we're going to have to sacrifice the original game parts or many game parts to get people up to speed to this point, can't we just maintain them and then make a new entry point because we separated off because this thing has become too big?
Well, how would you do a new entry? If you put it behind money, people are going to be like, no, you're just forcing me to pay to get to this, the relevant part, right? Mm-hmm. You need a free-to-play option as well.
Well, that's what I see is the big problem, which I'm really interested in how Warframe is going to solve this in the near future, and Destiny 2 as well, is because the reason why stories like Mass Effect ended after 3 entries is because they knew that at a certain point they would not get their their money back from like publishing a new game, because publishing a game was a big thing to do. Now it's not the big thing to do to release a new thing. The bigger thing to do is to move to something new and end off the thing that you're doing. So I think that I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know if they're even anticipating or thinking about doing it or how you would do it. But I think that at a certain point, the fatigue, like the franchise fatigue, which we've become aware of for the years, but is also applying to live services, which have been going near a decade or more, and are affecting new players and are affecting its relevancy and are also affecting the players that have been playing for so long, because there is tactics to keep you continuously invested into this thing, because that's how the game survives. And that's why I think it's a really interesting time for these games, and I have no idea how it's going to pan out, but I think it's going to have to be something we do not expect, because everything that I can think of at this moment has some really big drawbacks.
I think that they need to assess the situation. I wouldn't be opposed if they ended up getting a bunch of gamers and said, how would you solve this? Right? What would you do? And then there's a debate that's held, right? I'm not saying make mastery rank up faster. I'm just saying get to the second dream faster. But regardless of that, I completely agree with you. There is a problem.
Yeah. No, like I understand you as well. I would 100% would love for people to do second dream earlier, because that would tie them to the game better. However, if we're gonna make this first step of like, let's cut all this content in between to get them to the second dream faster, then would that not necessarily get to a point in time where we say, let's cut the second dream because then we can get to this thing faster?
I'm not proposing that they cut the content. So say, let's say to get to Ceres, right, from Mars, when you first land at Mars, you have to do 6 or 7 nodes before you get to Ceres, right? Before you get to Ceres, right? I'm proposing that those 6 or 7 nodes are still there, but they just reorganize the actual planet so that it's just 2. Yeah, that's all I'm proposing. The content is still there. You still need to do the content, get to MR 28, whatever, MR 30. You still need to do the content, but that's the grindy part comes later, not straight away. That's anyway. We are over time. that was we're not over time too bad.
No, we're not too bad. We can do some questions if you're not too strapped for time.
Yeah. Okay. Let's questions.
Okay, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them down in the chat down below if you're watching this live, or if you have any questions, throw them in the comments. Who knows? Maybe we can take questions from the comments from previous episodes. Who knows? We can experiment with this. One thing which I think is interesting, I wanted to mention the Steam Church like a little while ago. I'll just mention it to pad for time while we're waiting on this. This is no indication of anything. This is just one data thing, and it's not a complete data set. But if you go to the Steam Church on Warframe right now, I can pull this up right here. If it doesn't want to do it, whatever. Today at 1 a.m. local time here, Warframe hit a number of 25,000 consistent players on their servers, which, if I go to overall time, is only a number which I can find back in 2014. Now, this is a very incomplete data set, but it is an interesting phase where before we would have a consistently upwards maneuvering graph, and now it's maneuvering a little bit down. And this is not me saying Warframe is dead. This is just me saying I'm really interested in what they'll do, because I know that Warframe is saying this too. I know that other players are saying this too. I don't know what it means, but I'm really interested to see what the next steps will be and where we're going to go.
I think it means Monster Hunter World Iceborne came out.
Could very well be.
So I think, but also we're looking at one day, whereas the graph is showing the average across a month.
Yeah.
So,
It's as I said, it doesn't mean might not mean anything. I'm not saying draw conclusions from this. I'm just saying I'm noticing these things. It's interesting. And we're going ahead in interesting times because not only is an invention of something a really interesting point of what it means, but also its life cycle. And no one has determined yet how long a life cycle of a live service game is, but I think it definitely does have one. And
it entirely depends on the quality of the product. Look at Evolve. Evolve died very quickly. Look at DC Online, which I think went free to play within 9 months. I think it was the fastest one to go. Look at League of Legends. That's still really hot. Dota 2, that's really high and active. So I think it's entirely dependent on the quality of the product.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I have to see. We'll have to see. Are
Any
there
questions?
I'm not seeing any questions, many.
Right. I think it's time to do the sign-offs. So just want to say my phone was ringing.
We have a question. We have a question. Woo! Okay. Tribal saving today. What is the best/worst game you've ever played? Light question. Feel free to answer quickly.
Best is Nier Automata. Worst is I don't know. I've clearly blocked it from my memory.
Worst is very. It's really hard to define best. I would probably say so far either Persona 4 or The Outer Worlds. I've really enjoyed that. Or maybe like with Star Wars as well. Like that got me into console gaming at least. But worse, it's like I've played really bad games because they were just made by people that can't make games. But there are also games that are like bad because you'd expect more of them. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Other questions, I think.
Right. Okay, cool. So that's it for this week. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. It's been, a riot, as always. There's my Guyver models.
Yeah.
I can't point. Yeah, they're there somewhere. And, if you are interested in seeing this live, it happens every Tuesday at 7 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. Central European time, 2 p.m. Eastern America time. And yeah, you can you can check us live, or you can check us out 24 hours later on youtube.com/Michelle. Post Malone Games. Wrong. Got it wrong.
Right.
Or if you just want to check out the highlights, you can find them at youtube.com/Xenogellion. Likewise, you can also support the pair of us on Patreon by going to patreon.com/Michelle Postma to help Michelle with his many video-based adventures. And likewise, you can help pay for the production of the FrameCast highlights along with the Arbiters by going to patreon.com/Xenogellion and just donate $1 to either of them. It's up to you. We love you. We do. And yeah, we will see you next week.
See you around, guys.